will be trying to find out if she was murdered or if she committed suicide. Cindy James was a nurse.
The unfortunate death of Cindy James. On the 8th of June 1989, the lifeless body of 44-year-old Cindy James was found lying in the yard of an abandoned house in the quiet city of Richmond, Vancouver. Cindy had been drugged and strangled. Her feet and hands had been tied behind her back. Despite the condition in which she was found and that she had been the victim of harassment and assault by an unknown assailant, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police believed her death was either an accident or suicide. In 1966, Cindy graduated from nursing school, but she decided to become an administrator at a preschool for children with behavioral and emotional issues. Cindy was married, but she did not have any children of her own. In July 1982, she and her husband, Roy Makepeace, separated. Only 4 months after their separation, Cindy began receiving mysterious and sometimes threatening phone calls. These relentless calls came in many forms, with a voice on the other end sometimes whispering, at other times shouting obscenities and threats, and on still other occasions saying nothing at all. Cindy did not recognize the voice. The calls increased in frequency, coming at all hours of the day and night. It left her unable to relax or even sleep. Over the course of the next 7 years, she reported nearly 100 incidents of harassment to the police. 5 of which were violent physical attacks, while others were whispering or silent phone calls. Things got worse after she involved the police. Cindy's family and friends were questioned, but it seemed like Cindy had no known enemies and wasn't involved in any illegal activities. This made it difficult for the police to understand why she was being harassed so relentlessly. According to her friend, Agnes Woodcock, bizarre notes with letters cut from magazines began to appear on her doorstep after the police became involved. At night, Cindy would hear someone outside her house prowling about. Her porch lights were smashed, and one evening when she tried to call the police, she realized that her phone lines were severed. There were also 3 dead cats left hanging in her garden, and on one occasion her dog was nearly strangled to death. She even received a picture of a dead body in a morgue on the windshield of her car. She believed that someone was trying to scare her to death. She became reluctant and frightened to give details. Over time, the police began to doubt her stories. Agnes decided to give Cindy a visit one night in January of 1983 and knocked on her door. There was no answer. She knocked a few more times but eventually assumed Cindy was taking a bath. As she investigated, she came across Cindy outside. She was crouched down with a nylon stocking tied tightly around her neck. She said that she had gone out to the garage to get a box and someone had grabbed her from behind. All she saw were the assailant's white sneakers. This experience, understandably, left Cindy traumatized, and due to the harassment and violence, she moved to a new house, painted her car, and changed her last name. She also hired a private investigator named Ozzy Caban to try and find out who was doing all of this to her. The police continued their investigation and questioned Cindy several times. Ozzy later reported that she would not tell them the entire story. She would be evasive, withhold information, and not act as a normal victim would. When the police gave her a polygraph test, the examiner also claimed that she was withholding information. Her mother, Tilly Hack, thinks the reason for her reluctance was that her attacker had threatened her family. Cindy might have been scared that by naming him, he would kill her family or friends. On the evening of January 30, 1984, Ozzy heard strange sounds coming over a two-way radio he had given Cindy and went straight to her house. Once he arrived at her home, he found it was locked. Looking through one of the windows, he saw Cindy lying on the floor with a paring knife through her hand. She was taken to the hospital where she later recalled being attacked by an unknown assailant and a needle going into her arm. Police never found fingerprints from a suspect and there was no independent corroboration. Cindy sometimes only saw one attacker and at other times there were 2 or 3, but police could never find a suspect. The threatening phone calls continued, but they were too short to trace. She would never receive any threatening calls or be attacked, while the police had 24-hour surveillance on her house, sometimes for days on end with up to 14 officers present. But when surveillance was off her house, another incident would happen. As police became skeptical of the harassment, Cindy's parents believed her attacker was staying away to make them suspicious of her, monitoring their every move. On December 11, 1985, Cindy was found dazed and semi-conscious lying in a ditch 6 miles from her house. She was wearing a man's work boot and glove and was suffering from hypothermia. She also had cuts and bruises all over her body. A black nylon stocking had been tied tightly around her neck. A needle mark was found on her arm. Cindy unfortunately had no memory of what had happened. Agnes and her husband, Tom, stayed with Cindy to keep her calm and to help protect her. One night in April 1986, they heard noises and awoke to find the basement in flames and the phone dead. When Tom went to alert the neighbors, he saw a man at the curb and asked him to call the fire department. Instead, the man simply ran off down the street. The police suspected that Cindy had staged the incident. They found no dust or fingerprints disturbed on the outside of the windowsill. The fire was set inside the house. To set the fire, it was thought the perpetrator would have needed to climb through a specific window. It was also considered odd by the police that Cindy still freely walked her dog outside during the attacks and harassment. Cindy's doctor committed her to a local psychiatric ward. He had come to believe that she was becoming suicidal. 10 weeks later, she left the hospital. Her father, Otto Hack, said that she finally admitted to her family and friends that she knew more than she was saying. She told them that she believed she knew the identity of the perpetrator and that she would go after them herself. In October 1988, Roy received a bizarre message on his answering machine. The raspy voice said, "Cindy, dead meat, soon." On October 26, Cindy came home from work and was attacked outside her house in her carport. She was later found unconscious in her car, nude from the waist down. A nylon stocking was tied around her neck and her arms and legs were hogtied with a second one. Duct tape was found over her mouth in an attempt to keep her from breathing. She went into a coma but survived. In spring 1989, she reported to her family and friends that the attacks seemed to be decreasing. Cindy was finally feeling better for the first time in a while. On May 25, 1989, 6 years and 7 months after the first threatening phone call, Cindy disappeared without a trace. On the same day, her car was found in a neighborhood shopping plaza parking lot. Inside were groceries and a wrapped gift. The police investigated her car and found blood on the driver's side door and that items from her wallet were under the car. 2 weeks later, her body was found at the abandoned house, about 1 kilometer from the shopping plaza. It looked like she had been brutally murdered. Her hands and feet were bound together behind her back. A black nylon stocking was tied tightly around her neck. Yet, an autopsy revealed that she died from an overdose of morphine, the sedative flurazepam, and other drugs. Police concluded that she had committed suicide and closed this case in July 1989. Ozzy did not believe Cindy would have been able to stage the scene, but others believed it was possible. In Vancouver, the coroner ruled that her death was not suicide, an accident, or a murder. They determined that she died of an unknown event. Otto and Tilly never doubted that she was murdered. Otto believed the police did not investigate the possibility of homicide or of somebody murdering her, instead zeroing in on trying to prove that she committed suicide. They believe someone in Vancouver got away with murder. Otto and Tilly have since passed away without ever knowing what really happened to their daughter. During the investigation, Roy was a suspect along with Pat McBride, a lover of Cindy's who was a policeman. The man seen at the curb running away during the fire has never been identified, but is also a suspect. What do you think happened? Was Cindy killed by a random stalker? Was it a policeman, and that's why they tried to cover it up? Was Cindy suffering from a mental illness and eventually taking her own life? Thank you very much for watching. Please check out some of our other content.